Hi, good afternoon. My name is Aisha Dixon. I'm the director of the UCLA Emeriti Retirees Relations Center. Thank you for joining us this afternoon with our partnership with this program with the Emeriti Association and the Retirees Association. So I'll just turn over today's introduction to Steve. You're set.
Okay, welcome everybody. I think you're in for an extraordinary treat today. But before I do introduce the speaker and the program, I really want to talk about this program. This is so exceptional, but it also required an exceptional degree of coordination. Ever since that I partnered with Michael Heafy to run these talks, it's just been a normal partnership of people splitting the work. But today's program could not go on without Michael. He's done an exceptional job. You're going to see that it's technologically demanding and timely. And if it all works as we expect, it really is thanks, of course, to our speaker, Carolyn Campbell, but also to Michael. And I don't want to take any credit away from Aisha, who really was Michael's partner in putting this on. So she and the people in the ERRC office really deserve a shout out as well. And I didn't want that possibility to be forgotten as we go. So thank you very much, Michael. Our speaker today is Carolyn Campbell. She's a former UCLA person, former communications director for the School of Arts and Architecture. And she's been in arts for years, serving as an editor of Arts Magazine. And she's an exhibited photographer. She lived in Paris for a while, and she developed a fascination for the Père-Lachaise Cemetery. It's on the left bank of the Seine, and most people who visit Paris visit that cemetery because it houses, if you will, famous people from Chopin to Jim Morrison. I wrote in the intro to the Emeriti thing, the legendary, dissolute, and famous leader of the Doors. I never heard Jim Morrison or the Doors, but I heard of him over and over again. In any event, Campbell has documented her fascination in this book about the cemetery. For those of us who have read it, it'll just blow you away. I'm not selling books for Carolyn, but if you really want to get the full flavor of this, you've got to go out and buy the book. But anyway, you're going to get an exciting introduction to this. We're all very fortunate to have Carolyn Campbell with us, and please take it away.
Thank you.
I will just say also, if you have questions, you can put them into the chat feature. So that way you can type your questions before we get to the Q&A, so we'll be able to pull them up as we're getting ready for the Q&A section. So they have the chat feature at the bottom of your screens.
Thank you, Aisha. And thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. My deepest appreciation to Aisha Dixon, the director of the UCLA Emeriti and Retirees Relations Center, and Steve Cederbaum, who we've had an ongoing email chat-a-thon since pre-pandemic that we've been trying to organize this. So I'm very grateful for his support. And to Michael Heafy, who without his technical wizardry behind the scenes, none of this would happen. And I also, last but not least, want to thank my dear colleague, Victoria Kirsch, who is on the faculty at the Herb Alpert School of Music and who will be joining us later in the program. No cemetery is more rewarding and historically significant than Père-Lachaise in the far eastern part of Paris, and for those who are familiar with that area, the 20th arrondissement. It's one of the most idyllic places, a forest really in the city with 5,000 trees, and in the fall it becomes a festival of color with the sounds of songbirds overhead. And in spring, the air is filled with the sweet scent of chestnut blossoms. It's also the largest green space in Paris. Though it is a model garden cemetery, its layout is very urban. The 107-acre cityscape has winding streets, pathways, and directional signs. It became a model for cemeteries as a place to stroll, a fusion of nature, sculpture, and memory. That brings to mind one of my favorite quotes by Honoré de Balzac, who was buried here in Père-Lachaise. I seldom go out, but when I feel myself flagging, I go out and cheer myself up in Père-Lachaise. While seeking out the dead, I see nothing but the living. Before we go on a tour this afternoon, I want to go back to how I became a passionate Francophile. I have my hometown of Washington, D.C. and the beloved Corcoran Gallery of Art to thank. I grew up in Washington and flew my kite under the 500-foot tall marble obelisk that is the Washington Monument, and ran alongside the football field length of the reflecting pool in the summertime. I didn't know until high school that the city was planned by Frenchman Pierre-Charles L'Enfant. He was responsible for the elegant design of the mall, with its wide boulevards for strolling and gardens bordered at one end by the Potomac River. It formed the perfect backdrop for great monuments celebrating history and culture. At age 8, I would take the bus west past the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue and turn onto 17th Street to the Corcoran Gallery of Art, where I went to the Saturday children's art classes. I was in awe of what revered American architect Frank Lloyd Wright called the greatest example of Beaux-Arts architecture in the United States. Who could have imagined that decades later, I was hired as the museum's first director of public relations and special events? I got to create receptions for visiting dignitaries and hold press previews for exhibitions set in the impressive 40-foot tall atrium with its Doric colonnade. It was during a staff meeting at the museum when the conservator Robert Wiles, who moonlighted as a travel agent, said someone on his charter had canceled and asked, did I want a round trip ticket to Paris? All I had to do was pay the tax. Well, needless to say, that was a yes, and I hurriedly made plans for my first trip to France. That same week, an artist at an exhibition opening heard I was planning to go to Paris. He knew that Oscar Wilde was my literary hero and told me that his ancestor, Sir Jacob Epstein, sculpted the monument marking Wilde's burial place. I had my first destination. And this is where our story begins. On my first visit in 1981, I came enthralled with the cemetery's rich history and artistic significance. I vowed to return as soon as I could. So in 1982, I commissioned a colleague, British photographer Joe Cornish, to join me and to create what I envisioned to be a nostalgic photo album of this Elysium of the afterlife. 3 decades later, we are still captivated by its ever-changing beauty and mystery. When I told Joe that we had a book deal, he quipped, I had hoped we might publish our work about Père-Lachaise before we were both buried there. I discovered that Joe and I were not the only ones in love with the cemetery. It is known as the most famous resting place in the world and welcomes 3.5 million visitors each year. It's the 4th most popular site in Paris after Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, and the Arc de Triomphe. However, it has been closed due to the pandemic and only briefly allowed burials. Now, with a second lockdown in France, only those who live within a kilometer of the cemetery are allowed to visit. So what was the genesis of this cemetery? In the first place, over the centuries, war and the devastation of the plague had already filled the catacombs and church graveyards across Paris, the traditional burial places. There was an incident when a heavy rain caused a major flood and a shared wall of the Cemetery of Innocents and an adjacent building collapsed, spilling thousands of corpses into the homes of the unsuspecting apartment dwellers. 18th century Parisian engineers had overlooked one significant question in their urban design scheme: what to do with the ever-increasing population of the dead. Those apartment residents and many other citizens complained to the young new first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon directed his engineers to solve the problem. So Nicolas Frochot, prefect of the Seine, proposed to Napoleon holding a competition to create new cemeteries on the outskirts of the city. The first ever commission of its kind was awarded to architect, landscape, and urban designer Alexander Theodore Brongniart. However, people were not thrilled about the long trek to the countryside for burials or visitation. Plus, the bishops did not like the idea of losing money, but the church had no choice. They had to run out of room. Frochot had a keen sense of how to appeal to the masses by creating something intriguing. He convinced Napoleon of a plan to win over all the critics, as well as the hesitant clientele, by naming the cemetery after Father Lachaise, the Jesuit confessor to the popular Sun King, Louis XIV. He launched an inventive real estate promotion, filling the cemetery with sculptures and the remains of the famous and the infamous, including Molière and La Fontaine, and the ill-fated 12th century lovers Heloise and Abelard. The grand opening of Père-Lachaise was held on May 21st, 1804. We have the 19th century architects to thank for moving away from the Christian-dominated imagery of a cemetery as macabre sadness and a frightful place filled with dead bodies, to a more pantheistic view of a cemetery that reflects a more peaceful concept of a sweet rest. After all, the earliest interpretation of the word cimetière was a place where one sleeps. Etienne Louis Boullé, one of the most admired architects of the period and the mentor of Brongniart, was a proponent of the pre-Romantic celebration of the divinity in nature. Brongniart carried out this concept in his revolutionary garden-style plan that has stood as a model for cemeteries in the US and Europe, including Highgate Cemetery in London and Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let's look at the map to get our bearings as we walk through the cemetery. And Michael has his little arrow pointer that he can show down at the very bottom, right above the bat figure. You'll see an arrow pointing to the entrance to the main gates at Boulevard Ménilmontant. Remember, as we start, the three tours in my book are designated by the color shadings you see here. The area right in Tour 1 denotes the oldest section founded in 1804. Etienne Gode served as the chief architect of the city of Paris in the early 1800s. Known for his neoclassic designs, he created the main Boulevard Ménilmontant entrance to Père-Lachaise, which consists of an elongated horse-shaped driveway with a pair of tall central gates topped by carved medallions. And as you can see, these bear the classic funerary symbols of the torch. You can see on either side of the medallion. Michael, if you want to just run your arrow up and down there, so they thank you. And in the center, the torch representing life's flame, and the winged hourglass in the center of that medallion symbolizing the passing of time. As you enter these massive gates and walk up the main aisle, Avenue Principale, passing the graves of writer Colette and Louis Visconti, the architect of the Louvre, one encounters the monumental sculpture Amour, To the Dead. Created by the artist Paul Albert Bartholomew, originally he designed it as a tribute to his wife. The monument features a mournful procession of 20 men, women, and children marching toward an immense dark doorway into the next life. The site also serves as an ossuary that contains the remains of many thousands of Parisians. You'll see the small door off to your right. When other cemeteries in the city were closed, or when people's graves in Père-Lachaise were reclaimed due to negligence or the lack of rent payment, the remains were placed in the ossuary. French architect Hector Guimard designed the only completely Art Nouveau tombs in the cemetery. His atelier's signature appears in the lower right corner near the back of this dove gray marble tomb. Guimard was strongly influenced by Eugene Viollet-le-Duc's ideas about ornamental structure. Guimard is best known for his entrances to the metro stations throughout Paris, including the Père-Lachaise metro station, which have distinctive lettering, arched signage, and curvaceous metalwork on the railings. And I want to recommend to anyone, when we get back into Paris, to always walk fully around a tomb. so that you can admire all of the craftsmanship on these beautiful sculptures and designs. And you will find in the very back corner of this tomb, you'll find the Atelier of Guimard. One of my favorite areas of the cemetery has a significant landscape history long before Brongniart applied his design scheme. The original 16-acre site was the Jesuit retreat of Father Lachaise, previously called Mont Louis. Yes, there are mountains in Paris. Others are Montmartre and Montparnasse. Mont Louis had a 1,000-foot elevation and creates some steep hiking when you visit. The bucolic site was planted with lemon groves, rose gardens, tree arbors, and many winding paths, ideally suited to the contemplative life of its former inhabitants. It is now called the cemetery's romantic section, which was the original area founded in 1804, and now serves as the resting place for luminaries such as composer Bellini, Cherubini, and Chopin. This, I want to point out, this is Joe Cornish's image taken on All Souls Day at the Chopin's tomb. You can see this is one of the most ideal times to visit the cemetery. Ordinarily, all of the grave sites are rather unkempt and weeds overgrown, but at this time, family members come and polish the tombs, and you can see here all of the votive lights and garlands and flower offerings that are left behind. Brongniart died in 1813, so many of his grand schemes never made it off the drawing board, including his dream of a monumental pyramid as the focal point in the cemetery. Historians have been fascinated with Egyptian civilization since antiquity. In France, this obsession was highlighted by Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. Obelisks and pyramids, which appeared on buildings all over Europe, became a prominent feature throughout Père-Lachaise. Today, it is a charming mix of structures with elegantly styled crypts next to oversized mansions of the dead, encircled by rows and rows of modest headstones, creating what I feel is the effect of an enchanted architectural theme park. The architectural designs in Père-Lachaise represent an encyclopedic grouping of many periods. You would have to zigzag to every corner of Paris to find such a comprehensive collection of the city's important sculpture and architecture, reflecting many periods and styles of art and design from early Roman times to the present. Fortunately, the tombs in Père-Lachaise parallel the city's artistic growth and houses all these styles. Brongniart's original plan was completed over the ensuing decades by hundreds of individual tombs created by an impressive roster of designers, sculptors, and architects, many of whom were credited with creating the significant urban plan and public structures throughout Paris. Some of those individuals are interred within the cemetery. Charles Percier, along with his architectural associate Pierre Fontaine, are interred together in the far eastern part of the romantic section. Their site is marked by a tall stele topped with an urn with the symbol of the Masons incised in a stone panel at the base. They were largely responsible for the popularity of the Empire style of the era. One of the numerous projects Napoleon hired them to design was the grandly arcaded stretch of housing on Rue de Rivoli, the second longest street in Paris opposite the Louvre. Considered one of the first theorists of modern architecture, Viollet-le-Duc was a noted scholar, restorer of medieval buildings, central figure in the revival of Gothic architecture, and the author of a 10-volume history of French architecture. He won the commission with a colleague to restore the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Upon completing the Notre Dame project, Viollet-le-Duc became chief of the Bureau of Historic Monuments, that same government office that now oversees the city's preservation of cemeteries. He also took commissions for various tombs and monuments, including the ornate mausoleum of the Duc de Mornay in Père-Lachaise. Evidence of the architect's vast knowledge of design is displayed in this elaborate collaboration. A tribute to the language of stone and form, though with its many layered finials, it may appear to be more like an aging wedding cake. Built in 1894 and designed by Jean-Camille Formiget, the name columbarium comes from the word columba, or Latin for dove. and originally referred to the compartmentalized housing for doves and pigeons. On some days, a plume of smoke spirals up from the chimney, signaling the operation of its crematorium. You'll see the two chimneys in the far back behind the dome. To have one's ashes placed in the columbarium, one can choose an underground vault or niche for small urns in the two-tiered loggia outdoors. To access burial niches on the upper tier, one uses the stairs. Several icons rest here, including the dancer Isadora Duncan and writer Richard Wright. Patrons often paired architects with sculptors when commissioning a tomb. Artist David Danger produced some 56 sculptures throughout Père-Lachaise. These include the equestrian monument we see here to General Jacques Nicolet Gaubert and the bronze bust of the novelist Honoré de Balzac. Sculptor Antoine Atex has numerous examples of his work throughout Paris, including Père-Lachaise. He was commissioned to create the rectangular panel sculptures of peace and resistance on top of either side of the east facade of the Arc de Triomphe. These and other high-profile commissions established his stellar reputation. However, his most famous work is the tomb he designed for fellow artist Theodore Géricault, with bas-reliefs of the painter's artworks, including the Raft of the Medusa on the base. The Raft of the Medusa, for those who are familiar, is in the Louvre Museum. When visiting the cemetery, make sure to look for the signature of Atex under the bronze pillow where Géricault's left arm rests. It's very top. And this is a little bit eye level, but in the cemetery, you're almost coming eye to eye with Géricault. Atex also designed the family tomb of Francois Vincent Raspail, who was jailed for his participation in the 1848 revolution. Atex depicts sorrow via the poignant artwork titled Madame Raspail's Farewell to the Jailed Revolutionary. The ghost of Madame Raspail stretches her arm out from beneath her shroud toward a barred window. Léon Verdoyer was one of the romantic Beaux-Arts architects of the 19th century, and he won this competition with sculptor Danger to design the tomb of Napoleon's general, Maximilien Sébastien Foy. It's an elegant Greek Doric monument with Foy's standing figure in the center. Verdoyer was part of the group known in Paris as a company of romantic radicals. Their projects often elicited the disapproval of the conservative Beaux-Arts academics. Controversy followed artists as well as architects, and the American-born sculptor Sir Jacob Epstein caused a stir with his monument to Oscar Wilde. He carved the tomb from a 20-ton monolith extracted from an English quarry. It presented an enormous challenge to the artist, who spent 9 months carving the large stone on site without referring to preliminary smaller models. A nude winged sphinx, the crown on the figure's head, and the hairstyle are reminiscent of the winged Assyrian bulls in the British Museum, which date back to 710 to 705 BC. The Wilde sculpture was one of Epstein's earliest commissions, made possible with the patronage of Helen Carew, a member of Wilde's circle. The work received high praise following the press preview, but due to its prominent male parts, was condemned as indecent. Epstein's work on the Strand in London was also criticized due to the highly sensual modeling of the nude figure. The sculpture on Wilde's tomb was at one point covered with a tarp by the French police. It was the last scandal attributed to the revered writer. Many pilgrims coming to the cemetery are bearing mementos to leave at the grave sites. Flowers, photos, a personal item, letters, even in the marijuana joint at the grave of Jim Morrison here of the Doors, as well as small pebbles. Jewish tradition signifies having visited a loved one, as seen on the grave here of Gertrude Stein. For those who are familiar with Gertrude's life partner, Alice B. Toklas, her name is inscribed on the back of the tomb. Beside the tombs of writers, such as Sadeh Hadayat, the Iranian author, a new tradition has recently sprung up. A small jar, and you'll see at the bottom left there, filled with pens and pencils, both as a symbol for the scribe interred, as well as, I suspect, a ready implement should one want to jot down a thought to leave behind. My own desire to speak directly with the departed is what inspired me to create what is the heart of the book called The Conversations. I chose 8 cultural icons and asked about their triumphs, failures, as well as any wisdom they wanted to share with those above ground. My friend Victoria and I will be sharing a conversation with Isadora Duncan shortly. The eternal staying power and drama of funerary monuments appealed to the artists who contributed to the mesmerizing environment of Père-Lachaise. They are used of funerary symbols such as draped urns, hourglasses, bats, skulls, and more. Not only the styling of societal taste, but delivered on the promise of awe and wonder in the land of the dead. Bats on the tombs illustrated the eerie side of eternity. Skeletons and skulls and other death symbols remind the viewer that death is a part of life and unavoidable. Winged figures slowly replace the death's head or soul effigy. These figures are generally considered angels. The word angel comes from the Greek word angelos, which means messenger. The chief duty of an angel was to carry messages from God. Statues of women in the 18th century often represented the 7 virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, faith, hope, and charity. Powerful examples of how women are seen to embody some of the most deepest qualities of the human condition. In Père-Lachaise, there are a few scantily clad female figures. Sometimes I wonder when family members unaware of the sculptural commission must have been alarmed to arrive at a gravesite to discover a half-naked damsel in apparent erotic rapture rather than in deep mourning. So at Père-Lachaise, we are confronted with the great paradox of this vast burial ground, which embraces serenity, horror, anguish, and acceptance, the grand sweep of the human experience. Day after day, year after year, the city of immortals awaits its next visitors.
That was fascinating. Well done. Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
So Steve, you have to unmute Steve to introduce Victoria.
This is going to be our conversation now.
Okay.
All right. Are you there, Steve? Unmute. Unmute.
Carolyn Campbell in conversation with dancer Isadora Duncan with Victoria Kirsch, a vocal coach on the faculty of the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, will be playing the part of Isadora. Go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
One of the many privileges during my 14 years at UCLA School of the Arts and Architecture was working with the students and faculty in dance. A friend and colleague, Emma Lewis Thomas, Professor Emerita of Dance History, said of dancer and choreographer Isadora Duncan, she carried the ideals of romanticism to their farthest reaches. Would that we all could follow her call. I am going to dance the philosophy of my life. The UCLA Library acquired the largest private collection ever assembled of rare materials by and about this modern dance pioneer. As I sat in the campus library reading Isadora's letters and leafing through dozens of her performance stills, it reminded me of the joy I've had in dancing. One performing gig even helped me pay my rent while I was a college student. Once I arrived at her burial niche in the cemetery's columbarium, I spoke gently when I introduced myself, not only out of respect for Isadora, but for her 2 young children whose ashes are interred with her. Miss Duncan, I understand you were born in San Francisco and raised in Oakland, California. Your family was poor and you and your siblings taught local children in dance classes. Agnes DeMille in her book, Dance to the Piper, wrote, It is no accident that California produced our greatest dancers, Duncan and Martha Graham. The eastern states sit in their folded scenery, tamed and remembering, but in California, the earth and sky clash, and space is dynamic. How did the West affect your aesthetic?
My movements have sprung from the great nature of America, from the Sierra Nevada, the Yosemite Valley, from the Pacific Ocean. They have sprung from what Walt Whitman calls the flashing golden pageant of California, the sudden and gorgeous drama, the creative spirit of the West.
It seems not only your movements, but what you wore when you performed that was revolutionary. A Paris couturier stated that women's modern freedom in attire is largely due to you. Quote, "She was the first artist to appear uncinctured, barefooted and free." You must have looked like one of the robed figures sculpted on the frieze of the Parthenon.
I felt it was my religious mission to revive dance, free form as opposed to ballet, from the 2,000-year-old dormancy it had suffered since the days of ancient Greece. The loose tunics I wore were as much homage to ancient Greece as a rebuke to the restrictions on corseted ballet women.
Initially, you didn't spend much time in the United States, but moved to Europe. Did you find more acceptance of your choreography there?
I had some theatrical experience in the Midwest and on the East Coast, but my first stop in London proved successful, followed by Paris and 20 sold-out performances in Budapest. But it was in Berlin where I triumphed. I also started my first dance school for children there, a lifelong pursuit to establish them all over the world.
I understand that you loathed ballet. Why is that?
In tribute to the classical female, I chose to wear loose-fitting tunics and bare feet, allowing my breasts and hips to be free, unlike ballerinas whose bodies are crippled and many times driven to anorexia. They are controlled by men in the classroom, at rehearsals, and on the performance stage. When I was in St. Petersburg, Sergei Diaghilev said, even though I had deep disdain for ballet, I was warmly welcomed by both the Russian ballet establishment and the public.
You drew a lot of creative people from different disciplines, not just dance, into your orbit, including some fascinating men.
I was a virgin until I was 25, yet I quickly made up for lost time. I had marvelous lovers, men and women, and 2 children, a daughter, Deirdre, by avant-garde stage designer Edward Gordon Craig, and a son, Patrick, by Paris singer, the heir to the sewing machine fortune. Craig was the love of my life. We were a good match, though he was married and had 8 children, not all with his wife. We worked and toured together for 3 years.
I read your and Craig's letters in the archives at UCLA. It was a passionate exchange of 2 powerfully creative people, but your consistent passion has always been children. I admired that you adopted several of your students who performed as the Isidorables and the Isadora Duncan Dancers of Moscow. We haven't touched on the loss of your children in a tragic accident when the car they were in rolled into the Seine, where they drowned, unfortunately. How did you mourn that loss?
I kept busy, but in looking back, I never fully recovered. After my sister took over the children's dance school in Berlin, I opened a school of dance for children in Bellevue, near Paris, and attempted to open another one in Moscow, a healthy distraction as I pursued my dream. I later met a 26-year-old man, I was 45, that I would marry, the poet Sergei Yesenin. Another distraction from my grief. It was tumultuous. We broke up, and 2 years later, he had a mental breakdown and committed suicide.
This is heartbreaking. Half of your life was spent in building a glorious legacy. This later period is such a dark chapter.
I moved to France, where I would spend the rest of my life, and wrote my memoirs to earn some much-needed income. I rarely danced again. Drinking became my pastime. My zest for fast cars and young men did not cease, however. and I took that fateful ride where my scarf caught in the spokes of a car. I died immediately from a broken neck.
Regrettably, we have no footage of your performances. I would love to have seen what so many wrote about: strong legs moving out from the panels of your diaphanous tunic, step, lift, step, head thrown back, the arc of your neck, arms open, and your energy emanating from your solar plexus. And I love that you performed to the music of Chopin.
Interesting that people found my dancing to classical music radical, and some critics objected. I say, why not move to those musical masterpieces? I never wanted to be filmed. I didn't want dancers to mimic my work or to follow in my footsteps, but rather to go on their own artistic journey. I believe that the era in which we live lasts but a moment, and that every soul, from life to life, from era to era, from star to star, follows a path to final perfection. I understand that the life of a man is only a breath. However, the pilgrimage of his soul is eternal.
Thank you. And now I'm happy to turn this part of the program over to Victoria.
The free-spirited and internationally renowned dancer Isadora Duncan choreographed and performed dozens of works set to the music of the most famous European classical composers, including J.S. Bach, Franz Schubert, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Liszt, Robert Schumann, Johannes Brahms, and Piotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. However, the piano works of Polish-born composer and fellow City of Immortals resident Frédéric Chopin served as the basis for more of Isadora's choreographic creations than one of any other creative musical artist. Isadora choreographed a total of 53 dances based on music by Chopin, including 24 preludes, 6 nocturnes, and 9 mazurkas. Chopin's music frequently combines a sense of improvisational free flight with underlying structures, as well as employing popular dance rhythms and repetition. This combination of musical elements must have given Isadora the choreographic freedom to create dances that celebrated the beauty of natural, unencumbered physical movement, while also adhering to recognizable structural forms. Thanks to the magical world envisioned in Carolyn's book, City of Immortals, we can just imagine both conversations and collaborations between these two creative geniuses, even though they lived nearly 100 years apart and could not have met while they were both alive in Paris. To conclude today's presentation, I would like to perform 2 of the 4 mazurkas in Chopin's Opus 24, published in 1836 and dedicated to the Comte de Pertuis.
Victoria, that was terrific. Thank you, thank you. Everything came out great. Hello, everyone. If you have any questions you'd like to ask our author or our pianist, I'm happy to moderate that for you.
There was a question in the chat about, can anyone be buried in the cemetery or just famous and nominated people?
Okay, I'll take that one. Okay. Thank you, Victoria. That was just made my heart sing. Thank you.
Happy to do it.
There are several qualifications to be buried in Père-Lachaise. You either must be born in Paris or died there, and or if your family has a mausoleum already established, you can be buried there. So in the case of, say, Jim Morrison, he had lived in Paris for about a year or so, and since he died there, he was allowed access to the cemetery. But it's a little difficult. It's getting very competitive, and there's a waiting list if you don't qualify under those 3 headings.
I was saying in the chat how bittersweet it was watching the slideshow, because I had planned this vacation to go to Paris this summer.
Oh.
And it was my first vacation since coming to UCLA, and I was really excited. This was on my list of things to see, and then All Americans got banned. So hopefully next year. But beautiful pictures. The imagery was amazing, and Victoria, your playing was beautiful.
Thank you so much.
And we
Well,
did.
Aisha, now there's a GPS app as well as a map, so you can rehearse your trip.
And just so everyone knows, we do have in the chat where you can find the book and the discount that's available to the end of the month. The 20% discount, that I'll put that link back in the chat again. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I see there are a couple more. Kathleen Fine asks, is it expensive to be buried in Père-Lachaise?
Well, Napoleon designed it to be for everyone. So it had a sliding scale. It's a municipal cemetery. It's open to everyone. However, over the years, it's gotten a little gentrified with its, the fact that it's so competitive to be buried there. A large plot for what they call in perpetuité, which is until the end of time. You can rent a plot for 10 years, 20 years. It's about 15,000 euros, which roughly in American dollars would be maybe about $20,000. But you can also get a small 1 meter plot for about 2,200 euros. So it's, again, sliding scale.
All right.
I have a
I
question.
didn't know you could just sign up for a short period of time.
I don't know why someone would do that, but.
I have a question. Have you given us all of the dirt on the cemetery?
Oh boy, ba-dum.
Let me get my shovel.
I think I saw Judith's hand go up.
Yes. Judith asked, is Auguste Rodin buried at Père-Lachaise?
No, he's not. Unfortunately, I don't know where he's buried, but it's not in Père-Lachaise.
He may be buried in his own garden.
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think so. We'd have to look it up, but I don't think so.
Is Josephine Baker there? I only thought because she was in Paris for quite a bit after leaving America. Is she buried there too?
No, she's not. There's quite a few expats. An American writer, Richard Wright, who was somewhat in the time period of Josephine Baker. Colette was her lover at one point. So she kind of straddled that period too, but no, she's not there, unfortunately.
May I say something?
Yes.
Yes, please.
One of the things that attracted me initially to working with Carolyn on these projects was the confluence of amazing artists from many different art forms. And as I started reading the book and looking at the names of the musicians and the visual artists and the dancers and the writers who were there, I started thinking about ways to bring them together in programs. There's one particular grouping that fascinates me. The composer Francis Poulenc, the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, whose poems Poulenc set more than almost any others. Also, Paul Éluard, another French poet, who is also set many times by Poulenc, and the visual artist Marie Laurencin, who was the visual designer, the artist and visual scenic designer and costume designer for the ballet called Les Biches, the Does, that was commissioned by Sergei Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe, and it was on music by Poulenc. So there are combinations like that that are just fascinating, that as we move forward on these programs, we're going to come up with sort of mini combinations like that will celebrate some of these inhabitants of Père-Lachaise.
Watch this space as Tori and I start to all these ideas.
So there's another question. Why is Père-Lachaise so popular compared to any other cemetery?
I think there's several reasons. One, because it's the first. It was really radical and as well as revolutionary in the design of a garden-style cemetery. It is probably an open-air museum of sculpture and architecture. I mean, when you visit, and you see this arc of periods, I mean, decades, if not centuries of great architecture. And I don't think there's any other place that has the confluence of cultural icons. And I focus mainly on the artists, writers and musicians and dancers, but there are Napoleonic generals there, important scientists, government leaders. I think there's a few French presidents buried there. So its reputation is hard to beat.
If we've run out of questions, I want to really thank both Victoria and Carolyn for an unbelievable program. In my poor preparation, I didn't give Victoria a full credit. She has performed with us before. I'm so impressed. Victoria, we have a musical program every year in January. This year it's going to be Arturo, the new jazz person.
Arturo Farrell.
Yeah, but I'm going to speak to Eileen Strempel about whether or not in 2022 in January, you and your students might put on a program.
We would be happy to. Actually, to make a bit of a connection, what I've been thinking about with some of my my vocal students, I'm actually a vocal coach, so I don't teach piano. I work with the young opera singers, and with everybody from Cherubini and Bellini and Rossini and Bizet and Poulenc and just dozens of others, fantastic composers. What I'd love to be able to do is put together a program with my students that would circle back around to the City of Immortals, that would represent some of those composers and poets who inhabit the Père-Lachaise. So
Well, we'll look forward to that very much. And I'm the one who has to make that happen. So I will. Well, you know, we solicit this.
Certainly.
The music school, Judy Smith formerly, and now
Eileen Strempel. Right. And Eileen Strempel being an operatic soprano herself, she's the new dean of the Herb Alpert School of Music. We really do, we in the vocal department have her ear, which is a fantastic addition.
She incidentally has just written a book that she promised she might speak to us about.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Great. Any more questions? Let's see. I think Victoria Steele put a couple of things in there about Suzanne Sontag is buried there.
Oh, right.
No, I think she's in Montmartre.
There's online, you can actually find a list of a good number of the residents, and it's a lot of fun to look at them and start tracing who was friends with whom. I mean, Chopin is buried there, but his friend, the piano maker Pleyel, is also buried there, very close to him. So it's a.
I should point out that in the map in the back of the book, there is a full list of everyone who is there alphabetically, so that you don't get necessarily lost when you're there. I did want to point out the UCLA is such a rich research resource. Someone pointed out in the chat about the Clark Library having this immense, probably the world's largest collection of ephemera and documentation on Oscar Wilde. And I had been faithfully following all of their 17th and 18th century programs. And I was fortunate enough to meet Oscar Wilde's grandson, Merlin Holland, who came to speak about Wilde and the Finns, you know, that whole period. So it's endless. And I only probably, when I was researching Isadora Duncan, touched the tip of the iceberg. There, a gentleman whose name escapes me right now, but I'm sure Victoria Steele would know. He had been collecting ephemera of and historic documentation of Isadora Duncan for 30 years and left it to UCLA's special collections. So if you want to further explore, UCLA is the place.
One of the other things that's a feature of the cemetery that I just wanted to bring up, mostly because it was something that affected me very deeply when I went to see, when I was at Père-Lachaise. I went there several times. I was playing for the soprano Julia Migenes, who's the Carmen in the movie by Francesco Rosi, and we were doing a one-woman show there. And so I had a lot of time to be able to walk around after I would practice every day. So one of the places I went was Père-Lachaise, and one of the things that deeply affected me were the number of memorials to Holocaust victims, Jewish and otherwise, and also there are a number of memorials to revolutionary fighters. So it's not just a place where people famous and not so famous are buried, but also there are these very, very beautiful remembrances in really striking sculpts of people who have died in that way. So that's another feature of the cemetery.
Glad that you brought that up, Victoria, because I feature one image from, there must be at least a dozen in the, I guess it's the 97th division, very close to where Gertrude Stein is buried, and you come around that curve, and they're to Belsen and Auschwitz, and also to many numerous Jewish groups, and they're breathtaking sculptures, very emotional, needless to say, and very powerful. But it's definitely, I wish I could probably have done 10 volumes on Père-Lachaise, just on all of the different aspects of the cemetery. Again, it's 107 acres. So when you go, pick your paths dearly, because you can easily, within 2 hours, you can spend in just one small division. So
and take your hiking shoes.
Yes, take your hiking shoes and plan in advance. That's why I recommend people really kind of mapping out their destinations so that you really treasure what time you have there.
Well,
I just want to, I think Victoria Steele had her hand up. So Victoria, do you want to elaborate? I think you were going to talk about the Clark Library.
Actually, you had asked me to do that, but I wanted to jump in about the Isadora Duncan collection for a second. So the person who put together that collection was somebody named Howard Holtzman. And it's kind of an interesting story, because at a certain point, he lived in Los Angeles, but at a certain point he decided to sell it. And it was purchased by a Japanese collector and ended up in Japan.
Oh, wow.
Many years later, the Japanese collector decided to sell it. And I thought it would be a great collection for us at UCLA. Isadora Duncan, as you pointed out, was a California girl. She was, it can be argued in a certain way, an American who achieved international celebrity. I mean, she was famous, not only, in America, but all across Europe and Russia and so forth. So the collection, I guess I will share, had a price tag of more than $1 million. And I had an idea about somebody who might be interested in helping us buy it. This was Joan Polowski, and she did step up and help us acquire it. And so thank you, Joan. And it was her last act of philanthropy towards UCLA. She had been a great supporter for decades. And after the deal was done, she died 2 weeks later, actually. after we got all the paperwork done. And
Wow.
I called the dealer. We didn't actually have the collection in our physical possession at that point. And I called the dealer and said, guess what? And he just about died. He thought it's over. Just like, no, it's all tied up. We
Wow.
are going to be able to get it, but wanted you to hear it from me. It's kind of an exciting story, actually.
Congratulations, Victoria. That's quite a
Yeah.
coup.
And I stand corrected on Susan Sontag. Thank you. I thought she was in Père-Lachaise, but it is Montparnasse.
That's why we have Wikipedia.
That's right. I put in the chat, Victoria, that we have a scarf belonging to Isadora Duncan, a long scarf. It's not the scarf, but it is a scarf. And it's not dissimilar to the one you're wearing, Victoria.
Wow,
Yeah, we will fly out later. You'll have to see it sometime.
great. I would love to.
I think we had just a couple of questions. People were wondering what happens if you don't pay. Do they exhume your body and move you somewhere else?
When your rent is up?
Yes, that is exactly the case. There's two reasons why you could be disinterred. If your grave is not maintained, that means if it's falling to ruin or it's damaged, and they give you a 2-year period to either address the maintenance issues, and also 2 years if you haven't paid the rent. And it seems very difficult. I mean, fortunately, places like Chopin, where you have the Chopin Society, has somewhat adopted that tomb. The city of Paris also designates certain historically significant tombs that they fund to keep restored. But if you are disinterred, your remains are moved to the ossuary. So you are still within Père-Lachaise, but you are not in that particular plot. So pay your bills.
Any
there
other
there was,
questions?
Some Gloria Rom said, how long before we die should we commission memorial sculptures?
Well, I was speaking, as a matter of fact, I spoke recently with Michael Webb, who's an architectural historian here in Los Angeles, and we talked about the different cemeteries locally here, and what kind of monuments, because this is the Romantic period. This is 19th century, where everyone was competing to have the most memorable and glorious mausoleum or crypt. And locally, I found out that Forest Lawn ordinarily has the very subtle brass or stone plaques that are embedded very flat along the hillsides. But they do have a commission that if you decide that you would like something specific, there's a fine art group that will look at the designs that you're proposing. And you can, in fact, you'll see a few throughout Forest Lawn, and particularly in Glendale. People and families have created either an angel or something. They have a very small window of types of designs that they will approve. But I think it's a marvelous idea, quite frankly. But of course, I'm opting for cremation personally, so I'll be in an urn in somebody's shelf someplace, I guess.
Or the ocean.
There you go.
All right, any final questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or put something into the chat. Okay.
Totally unbiased. I really encourage people to get a copy of Carolyn's book. It's a fascinating read. The photos are stunning, and that, along with the map, is so much fun just to imagine yourself there and to get details about people and the way they're buried. It's just full of fascinating details. And I'm
Great Christmas gift for the person on your list who has everything. I guarantee.
This is Steve Cedar. I absolutely agree with Victoria. It's a great book. It fascinated me. And I have to say, I went to Père-Lachaise before I ever got the book or ever heard of it. And it's daunting. It's overwhelming, and you leave kind of depressed. But I would agree with Victoria, because she didn't say anything that you really wanted to see because you didn't know how to negotiate the place. So I would recommend the hiking boots and non-slip hiking boots.
Oh, yeah.
It's very slippery.
Yeah, wintertime with all those trees, they mulch. I mean, it's gravel pathways. There, half the fun is getting lost there. It's like getting lost in a dreamy forest. I mean, you want to, you know, everyone wants to find Oscar Wilde or Jim Morrison or Edith Piaf, but then just to wander, it's just magical. But again, be prepared. I have to get in shape every time I visit because it's not. I spend 8 hours a day there, and it's 1,000-foot elevation. There are stairs built into the side, the hillsides, but it's still quite a rigorous, visit.
Very slippery stairs, but
Yes.
very small.
All that moss and lichen and everything built up over centuries, and then the rains. Tread carefully and watch those open crypts. There's a lot.
Carolyn, do you have a website with other pictures available and more
Thank
things
you.
about who you
Yeah,
are?
it's cityofImmortals.com, and it has a lot of the history I discussed here, a lot about the architecture and design. There's a section of all of my resources, a lot of the books that I read, some of the films that I saw a lot of them in French, but there's a little bit of everything on the website. And if you've got questions, there's a blog post that you can just submit them. So thank you. Yeah. I live for this, right? I never stop enjoy talking about this. So if anyone's interested, please email me through and join the newsletter there. We're happy to keep you posted.
Très bon.
Okay, ladies, thank you again so much.
Oh, thank you. Our pleasure.
You're very welcome.
Terrific.
Great. And thank you to everybody
Thank
for
you.
helping us do
Wonderful
this
talk.
technically.
Yes. Okay.
I see
Thank you.
Odat raised their hand. Do you want to ask a question before we end the program?
Hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to say it was magnificent. I've never in my entire life even considered mausoleum or graveyard or anything. I mean, I was just awestruck. You guys did a fantastic job. I had a lot of different questions about, I mean, you said you pay per, how, like if I die and I'm put in there and then something happens and I run out of money, I mean, how does that work? It's a lot of people who've been dead for a long time, unless the historical society or something picks up the tab just to keep it rolling because they're so great. But I didn't even know you bought things like a mausoleum or grave sites like that. I thought it was just one flat thing and you just get to hang for eternity.
Right. I like that, hanging for eternity. That could be my next title. It is curious, but there are other cemeteries that have those kinds of time frames. And I think, quite honestly, it was affordability. And knowing that the remains would be transferred to the ossuary eventually, maybe kind of took some of the guilt off of a family member that couldn't afford in perpetuity. But the city of Paris has taken on the responsibility under their historic monuments to Heloise and Abelard, Molière and La Fontaine. Many, many, many important tombs are taken care of and underwritten. Also families, Georges Méliès, the famous filmmaker, their family did a Kickstarter campaign to have it restored. I helped them out here because he's a great filmmaker and I was reaching out to the entertainment community. It cost $40,000 to restore this tomb because there are certain restrictions on the type of sculptural restoration companies that can work in the cemetery. But again, if families are short-sighted and they haven't arranged to have the next generation pick up the cost of the rent, again, they're just disinterred and that plot is made available and they move their remains to the ossuary. So
do we have anything relatively close to this, the magnificence of this cemetery? in the
Well,
United States?
Yeah, Mount Auburn in Cambridge, Massachusetts was the very first. It was kind of, I guess, in the 1820s or something it was founded. And they very much followed the plan of rolling hills, very park-like setting. And it has become a historic preservation monument in the country.
Mm.
There's one in Bonaventure Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. If you can imagine transferring all that beauty of the 19th century sculpture to a southern plantation along the Wilmington River with featuring Spanish moss hanging from the trees above.
Mm.
Amazingly aesthetically charged. And
Mm.
there's quite a few. I mean, there's, oh gosh, New Orleans is filled with, there must be a dozen of really historic cemeteries in New Orleans. So I was really, quite frankly, never that interested in cemeteries. I don't, every time I visit a city now, I make a detour to go to the local cemetery. It's a wonderful repository of the city's history. Depending upon the period, you'll see wonderful tombs with different kinds of epitaphs written on the tombs, very touching. So it's, I mean, there's a whole, I mean, I belong to a Facebook group called the Cemetery Club, and there's 25,000 members.
Wow.
It's called Taphophiles. It's people who are fascinated with cemeteries. And so
Yeah, I am, Carolyn. There are historical cemeteries in the US. The Park Street Church Cemetery in Boston has some of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
wow, yes.
And people like that. There's another cemetery in Boston. There's one in Concord, Massachusetts. That they're not very elaborate because this was the time of the abstemiousness. So you didn't build those kind of ostentatious things, if you will.
Well, it's interesting, Steve, that the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which people think is too entertainment industry driven, is quite a beautiful, the Cassidy family that had bought it years ago and invested well over $1 million to restore what was really falling to ruin. And it has beautiful commissions. The DeMille family commissioned a major mausoleum there for their family. So the whole Jewish section is quite beautiful because they commission tombstones or headstones with portraits of the individuals etched into the stone, and they're quite lovely. So, and it's local, and in the middle of a pandemic when you want social distancing, walk through acres of a wide open cemetery, it's quite beautiful. But there's peacocks roaming around on the property, so.
But they're also 6 feet apart.
Steve, I knew you'd get another one in.
Or 6 feet apart.
There you go.
So I think unless there's any other final questions, I don't see, there's a couple people naming cemeteries in the chat.
I have one, Aisha.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Wendy. I see your hand.
Okay. Oh, that's all right. Hi, Carolyn. I haven't seen you in so long, since you worked at UCLA. My question is, you did research on the cemetery for 30 years, or maybe more, I guess.
Yes,
such a long time. So what made you decide to write the book now?
It's interesting. For those who know Michael Webb, he's frequently at the on campus because he lives right nearby in the Strathmore Apartments, the Richard Neutra designed. And he was writing an article about my map. He was interested in cartography. And so he was writing this article, and he said, then I told him, I said, well, I've got an app that's coming out. It's going to be for iPhones and Androids. And he said, you have so many pictures and so much material. Why don't you write a book? And I said, right, from your lips to God's ears, what writer and photographer doesn't want a book? And he says, well, why don't I introduce you to my publisher, Gordon Goff? And literally within a month, Gordon said, I'd love to do a beautiful book. I had a contract and we were off and running. So it's one of those serendipitous kind of things that happens, and it's the timing. It happened when it was supposed to happen. And I don't think if I had published 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been the same book. The different, again, my last trip there was in the end of 2018. And I was still finding and clarifying where tombs were, getting more details. The interviews that I did, I had 3 conversations, and Gordon said, oh no, we need about a dozen. And I was like, oh my God. And I had 3 months to write the book, which was also daunting. I said, could I have like 4 to 6 months? And I wanted to take one more trip back to Paris. And he said, could you do it in 3? And so I wrote all those rest of those conversations. But again, thanks to places like UCLA, I had so many resources at my disposal. Many of it, a lot of it was done while I was working at the university, that I was able to find these autobiographies and biographies of these artists and was able to craft those conversations. So a lot of it is based on their actual thoughts about their own lives and their challenges, but it came together in total serendipity because Michael said, let me introduce you to someone. And here we are.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think there's any more hands. So thank you, everyone. Steve, do you want to do like an outro?
I thought I said goodbye.
You did your outro? Okay, so let's say goodbye again. So,
Okay, well, again, thank you, ladies. This was
thank you. Our pleasure. My pleasure.
My attention was away. I was writing a thank you note to Carolyn.
I owe you one too. I'm sending one your way as well.
Okay.
So again, this will be recorded and I'll send out the recording link once it finishes uploading. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Thursday. Happy Hanukkah for those this evening.
Yes.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you,
great.
Aisha.
Thank you.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, keep safe.
Yes,
Thank you.
wear your
Okay.
mask.